Hello, this is Just Listen, hosted by George. Today is July 28th, 2025. I hope everybody's having a great summer. I know that I am. Okay, so today I want to talk about the U.S. federal government policy on redistricting. Now, a little later on in the show, I want to focus on the efforts of California redistricting and Texas. Okay, so the first thing to know is why are redistricting needed in the first place? All right, so states primarily redistrict every 10 years following the completion of the U.S. Census. This is done to account for population changes and ensure each district has a roughly equal number of people. While the primary cycle is tied to the census, states may also redistrict mid-decade under certain circumstances. And I'm going to tell you what the circumstances are because I'm building the case again to the real motives that the mainstream media doesn't talk about. So, the decennial census. All right, so this is the U.S. Census every 10 years, and as you are aware, people move all the time, and the numbers of people in your state controls how many representatives that you have. Currently, California has the most congressional districts because of the number of people that they have. Then you have Texas, which might be the third largest with congressional seats. Now, there's something called population shifts. Population shifts within the states, districts need to be redrawn to maintain relatively equal representation. Now, that's one of the breakdowns or reasons to do something that will probably end up in the courts. State-specific laws. States have their own laws and procedures for redistricting, which can include specific criteria for drawing lines, respecting communities of interest, as well as the process of public input and adoption of new maps. Okay, another one that will end up in court. Mid-decade redistricting, like I mentioned earlier, some states have the option to redraw districts mid-decade, and courts can also order redistricting if existing maps are deemed unconstitutional. That's what happened in Louisiana. If you will remember, I did a podcast about that because they said in Louisiana, hey, it's unfair. We don't have enough black representation in Congress. And at the time, I told you that I disagreed with that philosophy because the real issue was a lot of people in Louisiana in these areas just don't vote. Political implications. Redistricting can have significant political consequences as it can affect the partisan balance of representation and the ability of certain groups to elect their preferred candidates. And that's the one that I believe is the most damaging because the intent of doing the census and redistricting is to make sure that the people are represented in those areas. That's what the framers were doing. The House of Representatives represents the American population, the little person who may or may not have a vote. That's why it's important. Now, what is the real reason why they're doing it? Well, both sides think that the midterm elections are going to be very important. And they think that if they can redistrict in their favor, that they have a more likely shot of controlling what happens in the country the next 2 years. And there is a lot at stake, from how much money is being budgeted, what is going to be closed down, etc. So they've set the table. Okay, now let's start with what the Democrats do. The first thing that the Democrats have done in the past is they focus on saying that if you redistrict, you are basically making sure that no one of color gets elected. Now, as I previously have told you, that is a scare tactic, and in my opinion, that doesn't work. The real issue in redistricting is that, legally speaking, the Constitution requires it, and it should, because people move around and they have to be representative. Based on someone's color or where they're from doesn't matter, because if you get the word out to your folks and they actually show up and vote, that's how you win the seat back. And also with ideas. Now, the Republicans currently control the House of Representatives, they control the Senate and the presidency. And the other side is trying this tactic. Well, both sides are, because the president, Trump, he wants some congressional districts done too. And the reason is because they want to keep control of the House of Representatives. And he feels like that if they lose it, then none of his agenda will get through. And any politician would do that. Try to make sure that it's in their favor. But the real reason that they're having to do it, both sides, is the country is very split over how things are going. And the only way that the Republicans can keep their ideas out there is if, in their minds, they do the redistricting. I would submit to you that ideas are more important, and building consensus between people would work better. Now, I want to pivot to what's happening in California and Texas. It's not funny, but it's kind of funny, right? So this started in Texas. So the Texas legislature invoked one of the rules that I talked about before, and they are trying to map it so that rural areas, which traditionally were in the past conservative Democrats who are now Republicans, can vote in these elections. Now, the state has the right to do that as long as they meet one of the criteria. Now, Texas, the Democrats are going to take the redistricting to court. And it is my opinion that the Democrats are going to lose, because the legislature can do that under the criterion that I presented previously. In contrast, in California, they countered and said the same thing. They want to include more urban areas and Hispanic areas, or just people of color, or recent immigrants who are now citizens. So and this is why I use them as an example. Also, New York and Maryland are exploring that too. Why? because these are heavy Democratic areas. So this is going to play out in court, and quite frankly, you're going to hear about it on the news night and day for the next year and a half. And the mainstream media, what I really blame them for is that they don't present both sides, and they really make it look like that Republicans are just being mean spirited at times. Both sides can be mean spirited. Since the president Trump has gotten in there, we have seen some changes that a lot of people don't like. And in a republic, that's what we are. That's how it's supposed to be. Now, I don't necessarily think that redistricting is the way to do it, but I've laid that out to you. I think that ideas are more important. Most people, if it's reasonable, they will follow it. Most of us are like that. We don't need either side saying, well, we're going to change the map, although they can do it legally, but you're doing it legally to make sure that the people living in those districts have a voice. That's why you would do it, not to make sure that your preferred candidate gets elected, even though one of the criteria said that. And that's why in Louisiana, they ran into all of those issues and they made it racial when there was no need to. I think that California is going to be very interesting. Over the last decade, they've actually lost a lot of people, although a lot of people have immigrated there. And in Texas, but the Hispanic community has turned conservative. They haven't turned liberal. And that's because of the ideas coming from the Democratic Party. Redistricting is legally correct, and it is based on the Constitution of after the census, making sure that the common person is represented in towns and cities across the country. It's not for the politicians to say, well, we need to make our chances better. And both sides are doing it. And they can do that as long as the American people don't weigh in and say, hey, look, give us better ideas, and we're more than happy to vote for you. This is Just Listening, hosted by George. Please subscribe to my channel. Tell other people. Have a great day.